Robby, what's on your radar today?
Okay, it's finally time to get into it. Johnny Depp's defamation trial against ex-wife Amber Heard has entered its sixth and final week, with closing arguments expected on Friday. Depp is seeking $50 million in damages in order to punish Heard for implying that he was a domestic abuser in a Washington Post op-ed. Heard contends that Depp was indeed abusive and has countersued for $100 million. Their conflict is messy, it's salacious, and the public can't seem to look away. But the fraud attempt by everyone involved, trial participants and onlookers, to condense a rocky relationship into a neat, uncomplicated story about one hero and one villain should give us pause about the wisdom of formally arbitrating such things. Anything, the Depp-Heard trial, in my opinion, calls to mind the sort of student hookup disputes that frequently occur on college campuses and were previously adjudicated in accordance with ill-conceived federal guidance relating to Title IX, where obvious instances of unwise behavior on both sides were often ignored in favor of simplistic victim-perpetrator narratives. Such campus adjudication is expected to make a comeback presently. The Biden administration is planning to release new guidance any week now that will likely be a disaster. More on that in just a minute. But first, the Depp-Heard trial has in fact captured the public's fascination. It's not surprising. The involved parties are famous movie stars with active careers, and other celebrities are lining up behind one or the other. Eva Green, a co-star with Depp in Dark Shadows, wrote on Instagram that there is no doubt Johnny will emerge with his good name and wonderful heart revealed to the world. Comedian Kathy Griffin, on the other hand, has shared articles that are supportive of Heard. The media is closely covering the proceedings. Many liberal and feminist commentators lament the widespread mockery of Heard on social media, while the pro-Depp camp, including those who think the Me Too movement has treated men unfairly, and also people who just happen to be fans of the actor, well, they feel vindicated. Heard and Depp began dating in 2009. They married in 2015 and divorced 15 months later. In December of 2018, Heard wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post in which she came out as a, quote, domestic abuse survivor. The article in question did not mention Depp by name, but Depp was perceived to be the abuser in question. During the trial, it was revealed that employees of the American Civil Liberties Union actually wrote the op-ed, and Heard had promised to give the organization $3.5 million from her divorce settlement. Odd. Depp filed suit arguing that the article was defamatory, and in fact, Heard had abused him, not the other way around. Now, what has emerged at the trial is good evidence that both Depp and Heard have treated each other very badly. Witnesses have testified to Depp's overuse of alcohol and drugs and how they affected his behavior. Heard, for her part, was manipulative and cruel and has admitted to throwing pots and pans and even striking Depp. Conclusive evidence that Depp was the more abusive of the two has not yet emerged, however, and plenty of testimony suggests that Heard is telling exaggerations or outright falsehoods about the extent of her injuries due to alleged sexual and physical abuse. As the New Republic's Natalie Shore explained in a perceptive piece about the trial, quote, most significant eyewitnesses is her own sister, Whitney Henriquez, whose former colleague and roommate has claimed that Henriquez had apparently moved out of Depp and Heard's home because she was scared of her sister, and contemporaneously confided that Henriquez saw Heard attack Depp, not the other way around, an account corroborated by Depp's bodyguard on duty. The extreme brutality of what Heard alleges, coupled with an utter lack of independent corroboration of anything, even approaching the extent of her story, and the fact that several of Depp's former partners have insisted he displayed no abusive behavior before Heard met him when he was in his 50s, makes her account very hard to swallow. Resting the integrity of feminism on Amber Heard's word is an awfully shaky bet, end quote. That's from Natalie Shore of the New Republic. Now, given that Heard is demonstrably not a reliable narrator, Shore warns against drawing any broad, sweeping conclusions. This trial is just a referendum on the reputation of two rich and famous actors who treated each other jaw-droppingly terribly in the most dramatic fashion possible, Shore writes. So that's a solid retort to op-eds in the New York Times that have mourned the resulting death of Me Too or complained that the trial is really about the historical misogynistic desire to watch women suffer. Quote, this is a good old-fashioned public pillorying, writes Times contributing editor Jessica Bennett. Only memes have replaced the stones. Heard was undoubtedly wrong to try to turn her bad marriage into good PR for her personal brand as an aspiring Me Too feminist and ACLU mouthpiece. That doesn't mean that filing suit was the correct response. The defamation bar is extremely high, and Depp could lose, even if he is broadly correct that Heard's abusive behavior is equal to or worse than his own. Now, if one were to try and make some actual useful broader observation, which I'm going to attempt to do here, it would probably start by recognizing that sexual encounters, relationships, and marriages are often difficult. People can abuse each other in a variety of ways. Trying to account for all the ways in which one embittered partner has harmed another in an attempt to assign abuser and abused status, that's an extremely fraught exercise. But this is, of course, the exact exercise undertaken at all publicly funded institutions of higher learning since the days of the Obama administration, under the auspices of compliance with Title IX, the federal law that mandates sex and gender equality in schools, something I've talked about and Emily Jashinsky has talked a lot about in our raters for this show. The Obama-era Education Department's Office for Civil Rights instructed universities to adjudicate sexual misconduct disputes in a manner granting extraordinary deference to whichever student filed the first complaint, often placing accusers in situations where they essentially had to prove their innocence against a presumption of guilt. The Trump administration reformed these policies such that accused students and faculty members enjoyed considerably more due process rights. Importantly, the Trump-era policies allowed for parties in a sexual misconduct dispute to settle the matter informally through mediation. The previous guidance had required institutions to conduct investigations, often involving a single employee with total authority over the procedure, even without the approval or participation of the so-called victim. Unfortunately, the Biden administration has given every indication that it will undo some or all of these changes. The department has said it will unveil new guidance in June. It's not clear how extensive the rollback will be, but with Catherine Lehman, Obama's czar of Title IX, back in her exact same position, there's little reason for optimism. Anyone who cringes at the extent to which two people can destroy each other's lives, I'm cringing, and reputations when given the opportunity to air their grievances in such a manner should be steadfastly against any return to form. That's my attempt to bring a Robby adjacent point into this kind of debate. I was only following the trial here and there, and then I started really catching up on it more recently. And I don't see why people enjoy watching this. People are loving watching this. I can't, it's just so awkward for me to watch people who used to care about each other go at each other like this. But it seems so clear that there's just, it's a messy relationship. Mm-hmm. Bad treatment of each other. Mm-hmm. The more serious claims that Heard has suggested or implied could very well be true, but she hasn't really produced the kind of evidence, and she has the witnesses who have testified to her own very manipulative and quasi-abusive behavior calls that into the question. But it's a bad relationship. Yeah. And you shouldn't at some level, you shouldn't adjudicate bad relationships because there's going to be a lot of wrongdoing here in both cases.
Right. So, then it's worth asking why they are adjudicating this right now. It's because Johnny Depp brought this defamation claim based on some sentences in this op-ed that you referenced that make Johnny's case pretty hard, because what she said, she didn't name Johnny Depp specifically. She said, I'm speaking out against domestic violence and making this broader argument about the perniciousness of domestic violence in our society because I too have been the victim of domestic violence. And people read into that she was talking about Johnny Depp, and then he brought this claim, which makes his burden of proof in this civil case. It's pretty difficult for him because not only does he have to prove that it was about him and intentionally about him, but that it was a claim that was made with malice, with the intent to harm him. And given that, it seems from the testimony that's come out so far, they both were abusive to each other in various sorts of ways. The fact of Amber Heard also being a bad actor here doesn't help Johnny Depp in his defamation claim if he also was a bad actor. So part of what's so frustrating in all of this is that the appetite for this and the focus on Amber Heard's bad acts, which, it's legitimate, they're bad acts, is in some ways, I think, indicative of people of an appetite for undermining Me Too. Since this case isn't actually about that. The case is about what Johnny Depp did, legally, right. Not morally, but legally it's about what Johnny Depp did. The fact that there's such an appetite for Amber Heard's behavior and the viral hashtags of, Me Too gone and all of this stuff, it suggests to people that the simmering resentments from that movement are still there, and people are capitalizing on this case as a way to push a broader political agenda. And that's unfortunate because this is a bad case to make for Me Too, and it's a bad case for people who are trying to make some broader claims about the non-existence of Me Too as a phenomenon.
Well, I think I mostly agree with that. Yes, the defamation bar is a very high one to clear for good reason.
Especially for public figures.
Yeah, I don't know that he's going to even come close to clearing it. You're right, he wasn't specifically named. She said she was a domestic, that she had gone through domestic abuse. That's not actually very specific language even. And it looks actually clear from airing the facts that there was some abusive behavior. Now, there was abusive behavior in both directions, but that doesn't matter for the defamation claim. So I absolutely agree with you on all that. But she tried to cash in on she wanted the victimhood status. She wanted this is the culture, this is the Me Too moment, and I should be a figure of it because of what I went through. And that was not a wise choice on her part either. The ACLU really screwed up by getting themselves involved in this, in my opinion. That whole thing is very shady. And then like the promising of the money from the divorce, there's something just not right about all of that, which is a kind of different discussion. Actually, we've had this discussion previously on the show. So that is a proximate. I mean, he responded to that. I don't know that the lawsuit was really the right way necessarily to respond to it. And now we're in this situation where it's just you're watching two people go through every aspect of a really messy relationship, and it is all. And I would rather it was not happening.
Well, in some ways, this might be exactly. I mean, I don't know what's going on in Johnny Depp's head, but to the extent that he was hurt or frustrated or made angry by Amber Heard's op-ed, this is one way to have retribution, not because he actually might win this claim, but because now we know all these salacious details about their relationship that Amber Heard would prefer not to be made known. And people can make their own independent judgments about whether or not that's a justified reaction or whether the punishment fits the crime now that we're all talking about Amber Heard pooping in a bed or whatever the next narrative event is. But it certainly doesn't do much for public discourse. And I, for one, will be happy when this private issue becomes a private issue once again.
Some private issues should remain private issues. I agree.
Well, HBO's Bill Maher made the rounds on social media for his monologue on trans kids. We'll discuss that next.